The cases of suicides among students in India are rising at an alarming level. The NCRB data shows that a student dies by suicide in every 42 minutes. Tragically, earlier this week, a class 10 student in a leading Delhi school died by suicide. He reportedly alleged that his teachers were harassing him. Today we have with us Professor Shamika Ravi, an economist, member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, and an author of a major research study on suicides in India published by the Brookings Institute, to discuss this issue in detail, to discuss the institutional gap and the possible solution. Professor Ravi had earlier this week written a very thought provoking article in a leading news portal on suicides among students. Welcome to the print, ma'am.
Thank you, Faria.
Ma'am, so my first question to you is that the cases of suicides among students are now spanning from school to major higher education institutions in India like IITs and IIMs as well. What, according to you, are the institutional gaps combined with this highly competitive education system of ours, which is majorly exam driven, is contributing the stress level among students?
Fariha, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. We look at data to understand what is the nature of the problem and is it worsening, improving? If it is worsening, for whom is it worsening? And, so the NCRB data allows us to do some of these things systematically, right? Because it's only when you understand the nature of the problem that then we are able to design an appropriate policy response. Now, the policy response is how the government will view this. The government has already brought in several schemes in the past trying to address this problem. But what we do know is that student suicides in general, if you look at the suicide mortality rate, it has been rising quite steadily, right? And this rise, in fact, is such that not just in terms of actual number of these episodes, suicides, but also in terms of the share of suicides. Students have now overtaken farmers as a category several years back, and they continue to rise in numbers. And I think that is where this problem is very acute, because problems have to be articulated to be understood. And I think sometimes you also need a group to speak for you. You need a problem like this which requires interest groups to come together and make an appeal for better policy. I think there is also that. The other element which I think is important to recognize is that the burden on male students seems to be more. If you look at the mortality rate of the suicides amongst male students is actually higher, and the gap between, while it's increasing for both genders, the gap is widening, which means for boys it's actually the situation is far worse. And it's these kind of nuances which when you begin to look at, and of course when you pick up the newspaper and you hear episodes which get picked up by the media and it's part of the popular discussion, it reinforces, because what you are seeing objectively in the form of numbers across the country, these episodes, which are individual episodes and the detailing of it and all of that, it reinforces. It's a very severe problem. It's a worsening problem.
Ma'am, you just mentioned about this gender-based analysis of cases of
Yeah.
suicides among students, that there is the cases are more among male students, right? So
Yeah.
what can be like the social or gender pressures behind it? What can be the conclusion behind it, the reasons behind it?
So Faria, I mean, now I can speak as a mom and an adult who teaches also. I mean, my past life was of a professor for 20 years. I think the problem needs a lot more detailed understanding again to fine tune. But the fact is that society is changing very fast. We have families that are nuclearizing. The traditional family structures don't exist anymore. So there is a sort of a pandemic of isolation also, which is unfolding simultaneously, and there's no reason to believe that the children are immune to that. So now the reason, when we think of a policy response, we think of acha at the school perhaps we should have more counselors, and we have registered counselors and so on. And there we can say we need more because it's still not sufficient. It's a woefully small number of counselors. But I think that is only because we're trying to understand at what point can we intervene, right? What you are asking is something far more fundamental, that why is it becoming so bad? And I think, there is isolation. Technology, many aspects of technology is also unknown. I mean, there is a whole world that kids get into, students get into when they are with their gadgets. Social media adds to these kind of pressures. But this gender difference, I think, has to be systematically studied. If we consider the traditional roles that men and women, or young men and young women, play in society, and the expectations that society places of them, then they are different, but they are also changing very fast. And I think, not just as parents, but I think even as teachers, we are not completely prepared. And I do think occasionally what happens is that, there is a hypothesis we have in our minds, which is based on historical experience of our society, that girls need a lot of support. The girls need the support, and girls, therefore, they're getting that kind of an environment in the school, at least as far as sensitivity is concerned. We are far more sensitive to emotional problems of girls than we are of boys. Boys also are very physical for students. Need sports. They need to vent out. I think, as I heard one psychologist say quite appropriately, that a tired young male is what you want. In fact, when you're thinking of the different ways in which you can use the energy, so you have to keep boys busy. You have to keep them, and sports is very important. Peer groups where they can talk about problems, but traditionally we don't encourage boys, and those traditional roles means they have to be tough right from very young age. So I think changing society requires not just the pedagogy to change, but I think the sensitivity to the new demands are they need to keep up, and I don't think we are there yet.
Ma'am, you just mentioned about this exposure to social media, which is unlimited right now. Children, everything is like a click away for students because all of them are having phones now. So,
Yeah.
what role social media can play in breaking these kind of gender stereotype that a man has to be really tough, they cannot cry, they cannot share their emotions. So, how social media can play a positive role in this?
Well, I think we need to regulate some amount of it when it comes to younger age students, right? The fact that there are countries now which are prohibiting access to social media for children below a certain age, 16, for instance, in Australia. We will have to think of those things, because giving access to this kind of unlimited, new technology, which has several dark elements to it, and there are risks associated, and we have not put the mechanisms of control, and we pretty much leave it to the parents. But remember, as sometimes parents don't even know. They might not be there. They might be busy doing other things. And so I think, and of course, the role for teachers, so in the classroom. But at the same time, social media also has a lot of positive elements to it, Fariha. So I think creation of peer groups, sharing of concerns, and lived experiences of children. And this is where we have been writing this in the past vis-a-vis farmer suicides, but I think media has to be extremely sensitive in the way they report cases of suicide. You see, it has to be reported in such a way that we do not, there are lots of sensitive people watching the news. So there is no way we should be rationalizing or trying to make sense of it, right? Because in some ways what we are doing is it's an acceptable behavior, and it can lead to more sensitive people to do the same, which is what in the literature we call it suicide contagion, that when reporting of one episode triggers copycat suicides or triggers others to follow suit. And a lot of it is driven by the way it is reported. When you give out too much detail and show the pictures, no, there have to be very strict code of conduct or guidelines that I think our media will have to follow, and we will have to look into this, that that creation of these guidelines are extremely important. Because we do have lots of young people and people at large in general who have access to so much information, bombardment all the time.
So you mean that even the graphic details we show on like television can be triggering for some people who are going through some.
Absolutely. This is very well established. That and that's why these are cohorts. These are groups of vulnerable people. So that's why terms around farmer suicide, student suicide, right? There are clusters that get created, neighborhoods where this becomes an acceptable outcome. That so and so was under tremendous stress and therefore she did this or he did this, and it becomes almost like a exposed rationalization. And that is the reporting has to be such that you have to show it as a bad outcome. You really have to show it as a bad outcome, and not bad from a causal that these are the bad factors that led, but to say, well, the grieving parents, or what does it do to the family and that small community afterwards. So I think the focus has to be more on dissuading other vulnerable people and sensitive people who might be in similar situation.
Yeah. So, ma'am, you also mentioned in the beginning that there are various mechanisms and various schemes by government to provide mental health support to students. But what, according to you, are the practical barriers in terms of probably stigma, poor planning, lack of manpower, which is stopping it to reach to every student who need this help?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of these, Fariha. It's a combination of one, we have too few counselors who are registered counselors in schools. That's number one. Most of our schools do not have counselors. That's the other reality. Second, the quality of counseling, right? Third is the acceptance, the stigma which is associated with a student seeking counseling, right? And of course, earlier, you could go and speak to your grandparent, or there were other family members around who, even if you didn't speak to them, they sensed something was wrong, something was odd. That mechanism doesn't exist anymore, which means those informal networks in and around the family that existed has almost disappeared. So now recreating it elsewhere through a policy requires first, going really into the details and having enough number of people and the support architecture that kids, do not take this extreme step. And of course, academic pressure. Well, academic pressure is something we have started to recognize now, at least for the last 10 years. We have been bringing in a series of policies. Now, the 10th graders from this year can take the exams pretty much like the open school. You can take it twice. If you don't do well in one subject, you take it again. And that's exactly, exams and these kind of academic pressures, one can, from a policy, try and reduce these pressures, right? But for society and parents to be sensitized, to lower that even within the family, that's very important. I think there is a certain amount of counseling and campaign. There has to be a public campaign around parents and communities, that it's not just the top 1%, or even think of the apex institutions, the IITs, IIMs, AIMS, the kid who gets a 1 crore job, you see them in the newspapers. Well, you don't realize that's a very rare event, but every kid now aspires and the parents aspire. That is just unreasonable, right? Because most of them are not going to be able to accomplish that. So to view that as a failure is it's just, it's absolutely uncalled for. So I think the government has a role, definitely, and I think the government must do more through the school system, perhaps through skilling and other kind of support, through using technology, maybe public campaigns. But beyond the government, Faria, the families and the community needs to step up. We also have to start to celebrate failures. That a kid who doesn't do well in something but does something else, perfectly fine, should also be for experimenting, for trying new things, for taking risks. Right? I mean, a 16-year-old, how do you judge a 16-year-old?
Yeah.
Right, a performance, quality or otherwise. So I think there we need to have public campaigns, but I think at a community level, and for parents, we need to have we need to create support groups. We need to have, this must be a public campaign.
You're right. Because parents in our society sometimes put undue pressure on kids to excel in everything, which is unrealistic actually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And parents, I think parents themselves are quite unaware.
Correct.
Parents are also responding to pressures that maybe their own unfulfilled dreams and so on. But there's more to life, and a young nation, a fast-growing nation. There are new kinds of avenues. There are lots of new careers which are new, and I think parents will also have to be counseled to step up and understand how this new world is changing and how their children are interacting with this new world.
How can this be done? Like through a policy mechanism, perhaps, like counseling of parents, maybe not just at school level, at higher education level, because the problem there actually increases when you reach to a higher education. The issues become even more complicated there, because you are in that adolescent stage. You are like you're aspiring to become something in life. You're aspiring to have a very successful career, and once you get into an institution like IIT, there is so much burden on you. You think that you have to achieve whatever it is at any cost. So how in such a situation at both school and higher education level, a policy can help parents understand this thing better?
Well, while of course we are talking about IITs, again, this is one end of the spectrum, right? I mean, how many IITs are there? Nothing compared to the overall number of kids out there with the different kinds of pressure. So these are empirical questions, that this fixation with one small cohort, of course, it's a puzzling issue, that why is it that these are the smartest kids and they have already cracked the exam and they've made it into these, what kind of pressures might be driving them to. So then you see the pressure doesn't end, because you have newer distributions. Once you're in the IITs, then it's that 7 crore or whatever that package that has to be earned. Everyone wants to get into the same jobs and so on and so forth. So I think we will have to lower the pressure. But once again, government has a limited role. I think government does have a role. We have to really supply the market and make it feasible to supply the market with counselors and psychologists and people who should be now part of everyday life of students, right from pre-primary all the way to entering job market. Right? Because think of, at the postgraduate level also, they're taking loans to study. Will they get the placement? And if they're not, how will they meet the EMI? So the pressures are different, right? For a young kid, I mean, this Jaipur kid, it was so sad. I mean, these are infants, these are kids. They've just come out of infancy, and what kind of pressure? What does pressure mean? And this is where I think we will need, we'll need a scientific approach. We will need many more licensed counselors. We need to flood the market right now based on the demand that exists. The supply is very, very minimal. So we need many more registered and licensed counselors and dedicated them to the education system right from young age till job market.
Correct. And ma'am, in your recent article also, you mentioned that there are various schemes, including Mano Darpan, and there are like schemes in place, right? And again, since the government can provide, but the supply is still less, right? So this has to be increased through a policy intervention. So what do you think right now, immediately after these two back-to-back cases, should be the approach, like the immediate action to contain this?
You know, I cannot speak on behalf of how the ministry is viewing it, whether it's within education or health. Remember, mental health is a very large part of it, and I'm hopeful that one is taking cognizance of the situation on the ground. But we will have to. This is not going to be a knee-jerk response. Knee-jerk will not be sufficient for you. I think this is where, when I say that we have to create the human resource in the form of enough number of trained, registered, or licensed psychologists, or psychiatrists, or counselors, in the for this age group. Remember, we are a very young country. We have, and eventually, I don't think families have to be left to fend for themselves. There is, and this is where the policy then, when you think from a policy perspective, you're thinking, what are the points of intervention? And school becomes a very important part of that. So we need many more dedicated, registered or licensed counselors who are trained and well trained, and children have access, and they know that they can go and speak to someone. But beyond that, I think part of the teacher's training has to be that it's okay to allow kids to go and speak, because while you are trying to teach them all of this and test them and continuously hold them to certain standards of quality, if there are other things, it's not academic life alone. Kids are doing all kinds of things, right? Just like you and me. It should be totally acceptable for them to go and speak to counselors. And I think counselors, professionally, then are in a better position to support. But I think, the nature of the changing curriculum, the fact that your boards, the examination boards, etc., they know that these pressures are there, and that is why the attempt in the form of reforms that they are making is to try and reduce the stress on children, right? But let me now give you an example of when CBSE says class 10 can take the exam twice now. They can take this in February and perhaps again in April, May. Right? May. Now, theoretically, it sounds right. And I'm, for one, I think, it's great because kids can, the pressure is less, they can take it twice. But I've heard several parents complain that, my God, now, we used to be done by March, and now we have to wait until end of May to really then, get a break. So, that is the nature of anything. There is a trade-off. So the greater flexibility for the children will come at the, at the expense of time. We will have to give them more time. So I think this whole conveyor belt and this mental conditioning, that's why I think it has to be a campaign. It has to be a much larger campaign. And I really hope that not just the schools and the boards, but I think communities, and they will have to take this up, right? I hope many philanthropies who do look at schooling also look at the mental health aspect of it. From mental health and the health ministry's perspective, targeting adolescents becomes very important. So, like the telemedicine, the centers, the mental health centers that NIMHANS runs. It will be interesting to see so how many adolescents are actually even accessing it, because access for adults is easier, but for children, how do they go and register themselves? Again, it has to be through the school or the parents, right? There has to be some adult supervision. So we will have to think very seriously and come up with something more comprehensive. This is too big a problem.
Sorry? Yeah, so a collaborative approach is required.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, ma'am, for giving your time and these insight. It was really important to talk about this issue thoroughly, like we have had this chat with you, this conversation with you. Thanks a lot for joining the print, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for it.